Activision's Call of Duty series, despite being a household name and earning over $1 billion in 2018, is no stranger to development issues. There was the Infinity Ward breakup of 2010, and more recently, Polygon and Kotaku both claim that Black Ops 4 had very troubled production. Call of Duty 2020, though, seems to have had an even worse fate, with Activision going as far as to pull its teams off the game and then to have the relatively successful Treyarch blasted out, presumably with only a year and a half to go. Call of Duty keeps Activision alive. It is their biggest franchise, so it going down is really the one thing that could sink the ship. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Industry Report, the almost daily series where we go behind the headlines. And this time we are back talking about the beloved Activision Blizzard. Management at AAA studios and large publishers seems to really be one of the only things that we're talking about recently, although this time it thankfully is from a slightly different angle, so that'll at least keep things interesting. Now first, the news. Jason Schreier reports the 2020's Call of Duty has undergone a major upheaval, with Activision telling developers that Raven and Sledgehammer, who are leading their own Cold War-based Call of Duty, are no longer leading the project. He reports that Treyarch are now making a new Black Ops game instead, which is a pretty conspicuous departure from their recent 3-game rotation, and that Raven and Sledgehammer basically now have to retrofit their current single-player campaign to work in a Black Ops setting, and then, of course, to also work in a support role for Treyarch on getting this thing across the line. So why has this happened? Well, you can never really know for sure, but there is a lot of information to speculate with. First, though, a little bit of background. Who are Raven Software? So they're a pretty storied studio. They started off in the early 90s, and they've been making games regularly since, for Activision, since their acquisition in 1997. To tell their story succinctly, they started off making high-quality games like Heretic and Hexen, and continued to make well-received and successful games for years. That is until 2009's Wolfenstein and 2010's Singularity both flopped, causing them to lay off a lot of development staff. Activision then had them assist on Call of Duty. Basically, they were a studio that could no longer finance themselves by creating their own games, so they were then tasked with working on Call of Duty, since that point assisting on most games, and then also running development for Call of Duty Online in China. Overall, they have had a fairly good track record, and they are actually one of the longest living studios around today, even if they have had to adapt and change to survive. Now, the next key player is Sledgehammer Games. They are a studio that were formed by two industry veterans, Glenn Schofield and Michael Condrey. Both are established producers and directors of many games over the years. They wanted to create their own perfect team from scratch and build their own dream studio. And they seemingly did just that, working their way into a contract with Activision that had them exploring a Call of Duty spin-off that would be a third-person action game. Basically, Call of Duty meets Uncharted, supposedly relying on Glenn and Michael's experience working on the Dead Space franchise. However, this was around the time that Infinity Ward had splintered, with Jason West and Vince Zampella, now of course of Respawn Entertainment fame, being fired from Activision, kicking off a pretty darn high-profile legal battle with their old publisher. Now, when Infinity Ward fell apart, Activision had to ask Sledgehammer to drop what they were doing to help on Modern Warfare 3, to get that project across the line. They were all in agreement that that was the best path forward despite the risks. Sledgehammer really seemed to have proved themselves with that, because Activision then gave them a spot on the regular Call of Duty rotation, leading to them creating both Advanced Warfare and World War II, which were both regarded as pretty solid entries into the series. So that's the background. That is the two studios that we're dealing with here. So let's talk about the recent events. So first, what changed? After all, Raven and Sledgehammer both worked together on Call of Duty World War II, seemingly with no issues. Well, first, we potentially have an Infinity Ward-like situation again. Remember how I said that the founders of Sledgehammer built their perfect team in their dream studio? Well, maybe the dream was not all that was cracked up to be, because back in February of 2018, both of them left Sledgehammer to take on more executive roles at Activision. Seemingly nothing ever came of this, though, with Schofield leaving Activision in December of 2018 after his prototyped game did not get greenlit. Condrey also left Activision around the same time, seemingly being headhunted by 2K to start up a new studio for them, a practice that Activision, of course, actually sued EA for in 2010 when EA apparently headhunted the Infinity Ward duo. Headhunting is maybe an ethically, tricky practice, but it certainly is a legal one that companies can do. In the lawsuit, Activision claimed that EA, quote, engaged in unfair competition and aided and abetted breaches of fiduciary duty by executives, and ultimately they did settle out of court, so we're probably not really going to know what actually happened there. Back to the topic of hand though, we don't know if there were any super serious misgivings like with the Infinity Ward situation. Schofield is adamant that he enjoyed his 10 years at Activision with no bitter feelings. However, everyone is very eager to assume wrongdoing on the publisher's part, and in his article, Jason pulls no punches, saying, quote, it was very clearly an ousting, end quote. So that's definitely something. Officially, it seems like they just wanted to do something more than grind in Call of Duty, but it's hard to believe that Activision haven't done something wrong, so it's really quite hard to know what the truth is. At any rate, Sledgehammer have been without two of their leaders for about a year now, and according to Jason, some of their key staff as well. Sledgehammer have supposedly been hemorrhaging employees, and when Condrey moved to 2K, he apparently took a lot of Sledgehammer with him. This has seemingly crippled Sledgehammer to a degree, and the historically pretty great Raven have supposedly not been getting along very well recently, with the project being described as a mess. According to Schofield in an exclusive Game Informer interview back in March, the studios had a bit of a rivalry, but it was always a friendly one. They wanted to be the best, but they never do that at the expense of the other studios, and they would consistently help each other out. However, we've all been in situations where a project is going well and everyone is happy, but as soon as the social elements start to break down, the stress piles on and the cooperation is destroyed. Now, that bit of speculation, but it's not something that's beyond the pale. It seems pretty reasonable. Activision, of course, are no stranger to the implosion of studios. We've seen that happen with Infinity Ward before. That was a studio that worked out well for years, but turns out you can't just oust leadership without the loyal employees following. In studios like that, the best and most effective employees often are the longest serving, most loyal ones. You just have to look at Respawn Entertainment. They were comprised, at least initially, of Infinity Ward's finest staff, and that really hurt Infinity Ward when it came to Modern Warfare 3. So there's no doubt that 2K's new studio, helmed by Condrey, will be full of Sledgehammer's best employees. Such is the risk of running a brutal ship. The cascading failures of leadership disagreements can actually be quite crippling, especially for a successful studio where, a lot of your best employees, your best assets, will leave along with leadership. As for Activision's decision-making, well, they do have more than enough reason here. I have to be realistic about that. According to their Q4 earnings call from February 2018, Black Ops has historically seen far higher engagement from players than they've seen with even World War II, despite its really high sales. Now, to counter that, we just heard the Black Ops 4 has not had as high a revenue tail as they had hoped, in spite of its very strong start, with them hoping to add free-to-play elements to this year's Modern Warfare game. All signs point to Black Ops, and by extension Treyarch, being their go-to for this kind of thing. Blackout, their Black Ops themed battle royale game, was no doubt successful, even if it's not earning Activision all the money in the world. So if I were Activision, I would definitely be pushing for a free-to-play Blackout as soon as is possible, with maybe 2019 or 2020's Call of Duty coming with that or something to that effect. Saying that though, I feel like Black Ops 4 had enough business model confusion without them giving it away for free. I mean, if you thought Red Dot sights on a sale were outlandish, I'd shudder to think of what a free-to-play version could actually look like. It might be very worrying and eye-opening. That aside, there's something that customers are often willfully blind to. If Activision want a game made and they offer reasonable payment and it's all agreed to and, contracted up, then it should be done as agreed to. That's the harsh reality of business, especially in the extremely competitive industry of video games. Activision want their product made, and they want it made within a time frame to a certain level of quality, and they are well within their rights to say, listen, you two development studios, you had your chance. We don't like what you've done here. It's not on time. It's not on schedule. We have a mission, so we're going to give the job to the team that has given us better results. It's only business after all. Now, obviously, if that's a result of Activision's mismanagement, then it's partially their own fault, but the point stands. If Sledgehammer and Raven cannot work together effectively for whatever reason, it is only fair for Activision to relegate them to doing support work for Treyarch until the problem is dealt with. Now, saying that, cutting an entire year off the production schedule for a game, that does sound absolutely mad, and I'm imagining there's a lot of technical debt and just general problems in having to pivot this project so much. Now, in Treyarch's end, this does mean a couple of things. One, it's Activision saying, Treyarch, you are our guys, we trust you to fix this mess, which I'm sure would be a point of pride for that studio. Two, well, it's also them saying, your game's release just got moved a year forward. Cancel your vacations and get to it. I'm not saying that literally happened, but, you know, it's obviously a very tight timeline. We've seen how hard publishers can push devs to make release dates, so we can only imagine how terrified Treyarch employees must feel right now. Jason reports conflicting viewpoints on this, with some preparing for potentially brutal overtime, but others claiming excitement because they supposedly have a solid game plan, unlike their past projects, which had drastic changes throughout production. And on that, we're apparently going to learn more soon, with Kotaku having a report in the works on Treyarch and Black Ops 4. Given the Black Ops 4 business model, I'm extremely interested to hear what's there, and I expect we'll hear some pretty grueling tales. I'm sure that greasing the wheels of a billion-dollar product can't come cheap, and we know that Activision are prone to mismanagement. So, to wrap up, there's one major point that I want to bring up in this video, and it's reaffirming a major concern. Despite this being just Call of Duty, it also does relate to a trend in Western AAA. Cutthroat conditions for development studios. It's a $100 billion industry, the largest entertainment market on the planet. Activision Blizzard are nearly at the top of that food chain. In order to push the limits and to try to stay on the top, sacrifices from their perspective will have to be made. Being the world's best is a pretty difficult endeavor, and I mean best financially, not in terms of quality of product. And, you know, for the development studios who are working under that pressure, it must be hard. It reminds me of what CD Projekt Red said back in 2017 when talking about Witcher 3's kind of crunchy development. Quote, "This approach to making games is not for everyone. It's just a shame that in Western AAA publishing, profitability comes before the game's quality, and the developers are often kind of not really rewarded for going above and beyond, right? Like for making big sacrifices and really committing to crunch. Activision seem to refuse to take the hit for their own mistakes, instead driving their developers harder and harder to make up for their own mistakes and their own mismanagement, and this could be a prime example. Activision, Raven, and Sledgehammer all seemingly made serious mistakes, and now Treyarch are going to be put on the grindstone to make up for it. It's a pretty sad effect of how games development is turning out in some regards, but it is one that we could see improve given how widespread discussion of working conditions has been recently. So there you go. That's it for today. Another story of AAA development going wrong and a studio having to pick up the slack, this time seemingly with a combination of mismanagement from both the publisher and the other developers. I definitely feel for Treyarch's employees. I wish them the best in getting their next project across the line. And yeah, there's a lot of just cold realities here. It's just what is involved with a $100 billion industry. So do you think Activision are wild to keep the Call of Duty schedule the way it is despite basically losing a full game? Or do you think their management made the right decision? What's your take on the massively disruptive moves that are being made by studio leads and management during a game's development? I'd love to know, so let me know in those comments down below. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.